The official report read like a tragedy. On March 14, 1849, an overturned lamp caused the complete destruction of the county courthouse in Lown County, Alabama. But for those who sifted through the wreckage, the truth was buried deeper than the ashes. In the basement, they discovered not debris, but evidence: 3 sets of skeletal remains, each one chained to heavy iron rings fixed into the bedrock. The fire, meanwhile, had perfectly consumed all public records from 1847 to 1849, including property deeds, marriage licenses, and, most critically, the entire probate file for the powerful Sutton estate for over a century and a half. The descendants of Lown County have carried whispers about the 2 years leading up to that, blaze about the dark history of the Bell River Plantation, the twin daughters of Colonel Nathaniel Sutton, and the enslaved man named Marcus, who somehow managed to document the horror before he disappeared into history. What you are about to hear has been meticulously reconstructed from scarce surviving correspondence, a handful of medical files transported to Mobile, and testimonies presented to a Northern Abolitionist society that remained sealed away until 1963, before we continue with the story of the Sutton sisters and the secrets that poisoned an entire community. We must acknowledge that we uncover the darkest corners of American history that textbooks intentionally skip. The truth about Bell River Plantation begins not with a fire, but with a sudden funeral 2 years prior, and with 2 young women who were systematically taught that survival hinged entirely on absolute, ruthless control. Lown County in 1847 was the epitome of cotton prosperity, a tapestry of the richest black soil in Alabama that forged men into instant tycoons, carving the land into feudal estates centered around imposing, white-columned houses. Hanville, the county seat, was where the planters conducted their affairs, and where their wives perfected the art of blissful ignorance regarding the source of their immense wealth. Bell River Plantation sat 8 miles south, accessible only by a restricted, winding track that cut through water oak stands. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton built the sprawling main house, a 12-room affair, in 1828. The 24 slave cabins were placed a quarter-mile behind it, close enough for immediate summons, yet distant enough to ensure the colonel never had to hear the human sounds of the lives he claimed to own. The colonel's wealth came from cotton, but his notoriety stemmed from his personal philosophy. He was a veteran of the Creek War and held a deeply unsettling belief that humans, like livestock, could be improved through a precise and careful regimen of breeding. His personal library was a chilling collection of advanced medical texts, agricultural journals, and private letters exchanged with university academics, who shared his rigid convictions about racial destiny and biological superiority. He was tireless in his record-keeping, noting down measurements, detailed observations, and genealogies traced back 3 generations. His peers called him eccentric. His enslaved workers spoke of him in private only, with names that cannot be printed. The colonel never married. Instead, in 1824, he acquired an enslaved woman named Ruth, described in the purchase records as having uncommonly fair complexion and Gentile bearing. Ruth gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Catherine, in 1825, though he raised them in the main house, providing them with private tutors from Mobile, fine clothes, and a complete education in literature, music, and French. He never granted them freedom. Legally, they remained his property, an arrangement that gave him comprehensive authority over their every thought and action. The twins lived in a strange, privileged isolation. They learned to read and paint, but they seldom left the plantation. The colonel meticulously filtered every external contact, teaching them that true security lay only in seclusion, that vulnerability was a fatal flaw, and that influence, however constrained, was the ultimate power. They absorbed these lessons perfectly. They developed an unnerving, shared communication through glances and subtle gestures, often completing one another's sentences. They dressed identically, with Sarah favoring deep green and Catherine midnight blue. They shared everything, their secrets, their possessions, and eventually, a growing, dangerous resentment. Their mother, Ruth, died in 1839, while the official cause was pneumonia. The slave quarters whispered of unexplained bruises and a profound fear that marked her final weeks. After her death, the colonel's supervision became a vice. He installed locks on their bedroom doors that only he could operate from the outside. He required them to submit detailed written reports of their daily activities and even their dreams. He began to run psychological experiments, deliberately leaving valuables exposed to test their honesty and introducing male visitors to gauge their responses, all designed to root out any hidden rebellion. The plantation thrived under this dark regime. By 1847, the colonel's 63 enslaved workers produced 142 cotton bales annually. The slave population at Belle River was unusual, with a high number of light-skinned individuals and a disproportionate rate of childbirths. The overseer, Jonas Pritchett, who had worked there for 15 years, meticulously executed the colonel's orders. Pritchett kept his own frightening records, punishment logs, work assignments, and, most horrifyingly, detailed notebooks documenting the forced pairings for the colonel's breeding program. These private ledgers, written in cramped script, charted unspeakable atrocities with the coldness of agricultural reports, detailing forced unions, sired children, and terminated pregnancies. Inside the main house, Sarah and Catherine were far more aware than their father realized. They would read his private journals when he traveled, piecing together fragments of his conversations with Pritchett. They knew exactly what horrors unfolded in the quarters after sunset. They knew which slaves were, in fact, their own half-siblings. They understood that their father viewed human beings as specimens in his personal eugenics laboratory, and they allowed a terrifying, cold fury to grow inside them, a patient hatred he would have never recognized. The morning of February 3, 1847, arrived with unexpected warmth. Colonel Sutton had spent the previous night in his study, finalizing a complex letter to a medical professor. When he missed breakfast, the household staff assumed he was merely sleeping late, a common occurrence. It was Pritchett who found him at 10 o'clock, slumped lifelessly in his chair, papers scattered across the desk. The colonel's face was a gray color, and his hand was cold and waxy. Dr. Amos Grayfield was summoned from Hanville and swiftly pronounced the death a hard seizure. The man was 56, worked himself to exhaustion. I had warned him. The heart simply gives out. Nothing more, Grayfield concluded, barely examining the body. Yet, several details contradicted this simple verdict. The colonel's dinner tray from the evening before was virtually untouched. A long cold cup of coffee showed a peculiar, glittering sediment at the bottom. Most telling was his final letter to his mobile attorney, abruptly terminating mid-sentence. I have made certain arrangements regarding the future of my daughters, which must be executed precisely as stipulated for their own protection and for the preservation of my life's work. Should any person attempt to. The sentence trailed off the page, as if his grip had instantly vanished. Sarah and Catherine stood in the hall outside the study. They were already dressed in matching black morning gowns, clothes they could not possibly have prepared. Their faces were devoid of tears, showing no trace of shock or sorrow. They held hands, their fingers tightly interlaced, watching the proceedings with an identical, unsettling composure. When a neighboring planter suggested a closer examination of the body, Dr. Grayfield dismissed him, irritated that his professional judgment was questioned. I've seen 100 cases. The body simply gives out. But when the doctor attempted to speak with the daughters about funeral details, he was met only with their perfectly silent, watchful calm. They had no questions for him. They already knew the only thing that mattered. The man who held all the keys was gone. The balance of power at Belle River had shifted. The sudden silence in the study was broken by Sarah, her voice perfectly cold, modulated as a January chill. "Dr. Grayfield, we appreciate your prompt attendance. The funeral will be held 3 days hence, with burial in the family plot. Mr. Jeremiah Osgood, our father's attorney from Mobile, has been summoned and should arrive by tomorrow evening. Until such time as the will is read and the estate settled, Catherine and I will manage all plantation affairs. Pritchett will continue as overseer, but under our direct supervision." A noticeable tension settled among the men in the room. They exchanged cautious glances. Women, particularly unmarried ones, barely 22 years old, did not manage vast cotton plantations. But there was something deeper, a chilling precision they couldn't name, a sense that the Sutton sisters had not just reacted to this moment, but had been actively waiting for it, having rehearsed every word and calculated the perfect sequence of events. "Now, Miss Sarah," Mr. Breenidge began, adopting the slow, patronizing tone men reserved for matters they believed were beyond a woman's grasp. "You can't seriously expect to? Our father educated us specifically for this eventuality," Catherine interrupted, her voice an echo of her sister's cool authority. "We understand crop rotation, market factors, and the careful management of field labor. We have studied his methods for years. This plantation will continue to operate at its current level of productivity." The men had no way of knowing the depth of the sisters' preparation. For months, they had absorbed their father's account books, memorized the capabilities and names of every enslaved person, and identified exactly which merchants in Hanville could be easily swayed. They were ready for every scenario, save one, the specific, cruel contents of their father's last testament. The funeral took place under a forbidding gray sky on February 6th. 43 neighbors and business associates attended, filling the parlor where the colonel lay in a walnut casket lined with white satin. The eulogy, delivered by Reverend Samuel Yates, praised the colonel's contributions to agricultural science and prosperity, carefully omitting the nature of his actual scientific work. No enslaved person from Belle River attended. Instead, they gathered quietly in the quarters that evening for their own clandestine ceremonia, mixture of old traditions and Christian hymns, celebrating the settling of accounts. The sound of their singing was kept low, yet it carried across the frozen fields to the veranda where Sarah and Catherine sat. "They think they're free now," Sarah murmured softly, watching the faint glow from the quarters. "They'll learn differently," Catherine replied. Jeremiah Osgood arrived the following evening. He was a portly, silver-haired man of 50 from Mobile, possessing the weary caution of an attorney used to delivering devastating news to clients who held the real power. He carried a heavy leather satchel containing the colonel's will and several sealed documents meant only for the twins. The reading was held in the colonel's study, now perfectly sanitized of any trace of his death. The sisters sat together on a settee, their black mourning dresses whispering softly as they shifted their positions. Overseer Pritchett stood silent and uninvited by the door, his weathered face revealing nothing. Osgood withdrew a thick, black-ribboned document. Colonel Sutton revised his will on December 12, 1846. He announced, less than 2 months before his death. "The provisions are, I must warn you, unconventional." After the standard charitable bequests, Osgood reached the core of the document: the fate of the plantation and its people. "To my daughters, Sarah and Catherine Sutton, I leave the entirety of Belle River Plantation, including all lands, structures, livestock, equipment, and human property, to be held jointly and equally between them." Then came the cold knife. "However, this bequest is strictly conditional upon the following stipulations, which must be satisfied within 24 months of my death." Osgood paused, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "First, both daughters must enter into lawful Christian marriage with men of suitable character and standing approved by the executor of this estate. Second, both marriages must produce legitimate offspring within the stipulated time frame. Third, the daughters must maintain the plantation at current levels of productivity and demonstrate sound management of its resources. Sarah's hand locked onto Catherine's, their knuckles turning stark white. Should these conditions not be met, Osgood Reed, his voice dropping low, Bell River Plantation and all its assets shall be sold at public auction, with proceeds distributed equally among a list of various charitable institutions. The list was a final act of malice: agricultural colleges, medical societies, and organizations dedicated to the advancement of scientific understanding of human populations. It was the Colonel's last attempt to ensure his appalling ideology outlived him. "There's more," Osgood said, producing a second, sealed document. "A private letter to you both." Sarah broke the wax seal with a precise thumbnail. Catherine leaned close, and they read together in chilling silence. The letter outlined their father's reasoning with clinical clarity. He had observed their unnatural attachment, their rejection of typical feminine pursuits, and had concluded they would never willingly separate or form the appropriate alliances necessary to continue his work. So, he had manufactured a situation to force their hands, marry and breed, or lose absolutely everything. But the final paragraph held the deepest threat. "I have made arrangements to ensure you choose wisely. My network of correspondence extends throughout the state and beyond. They will be watching, reporting back on your conduct and your choices. Remember always that you are what I made you, and you cannot escape the fundamental truth of your nature, no matter how you might pretend otherwise. The blood that flows through your veins is both your privilege and your prison." Sarah carefully folded the letter back into its envelope, her expression utterly composed. "We understand the terms. Who serves as executive?" "I do," Osgood replied, "along with Mr. Breenidge, as co-executive. We are charged with approving any marriage proposals and ensuring the conditions are met." 24 months, Catherine stated, calculating quickly. "That gives us until February 1849, correct? I must say, ladies, your father's provisions are highly irregular. Most attorneys would have counseled against such." "Our father's mind was entirely his own," Sarah interrupted, her voice dismissing him. "We will comply with his wishes. Now, if you will excuse us, we have plantation business to attend to." After Osgood departed, promising a return in 6 months to assess their progress, the twins remained in the study. Catherine sat in the Colonel's imposing leather chair. Sarah perched on the armrest, surrounded by the walls lined with journals and medical texts, ledgers documenting 2 decades of human experimentation, disguised as agricultural management. "We can't find suitable husbands in 24 months, Catherine said finally. He knew that. He designed this entire scenario to fail. "Not if we control every variable," Sarah replied, a subtle, cold smile touching her lips. "Father taught us that much. He believed humans could be bred like livestock, that every aspect of reproduction could be managed and directed. We'll prove him right. Just not in the way he intended. What are you suggesting?" Sarah rose and moved to the desk, pulling open the bottom drawer that contained their father's most private records. She withdrew a leather-bound journal and opened it to a page marked with a silk ribbon. "Father's breeding logs." Catherine joined her, reading over her shoulder. The entries were clinical, dehumanizing, describing people as if they were cattle, purchased male, approximately 25 years from Williamson Estate. Good teeth, strong back, quick to learn tasks. Paired with female number 4. Results: 1 male child sold 1837. 1 female child retained for future breeding. "He was a monster," Catherine whispered. "He was," Sarah agreed, "but he was also thorough. And somewhere in these records is the solution to our problem." Over the following weeks, the sisters were consumed by their father's documentation. They discovered the full, horrific scope of his obsession. 20 years of journals, detailed genealogies, physical measurements, and observations on temperament. Bell River was not a home. It was a laboratory. But within that documentation, they found something the colonel had entirely failed to recognize: evidence of resilience and subtle resistance among the very people he tried to reduce to data points. They found notes about slaves who taught themselves to read despite explicit prohibition, women who quietly used folk knowledge to control their own fertility, and men who slowed production through calculated accidents. Their father had noted these deficiencies, without ever recognizing them as acts of rebellion. One name appeared repeatedly in the later journals, always followed by annotations of rising frustration: Ruth, their mother. The colonel had purchased her, expecting a compliant subject for his experiments. Instead, he found a woman who resisted with subtle persistence, whispering about her life before slavery, teaching her daughters to read when he was absent, and planting seeds of doubt about his absolute authority. "She tried to protect us," Catherine murmured, tracing her finger over their mother's name in the ledger, "even when she couldn't save herself." "Then we owe her more than survival," Sarah replied, a new steel in her voice. "We owe her victory. But victory requires resources, time, and one more element they didn't yet possess: a man they could control completely, whose presence would satisfy the letter of their father's will while violating its spirit entirely." The answer arrived in late April, though they didn't immediately see it. The spring auction in Hahnville was not a marketplace. It was a brutal spectacle, drawing bidders from across central Alabama and transforming the courthouse square into a terrifying arena of human misery. Enslaved individuals were displayed on a raised platform, subjected to the cold scrutiny of white men who checked their teeth, muscle tone, and questioned them invasively about their history. The air was a heavy, suffocating mix of dust, sweat, and profound fear. Sarah and Catherine attended, alongside Pritchett, veiled in black to maintain their mourning and, crucially, to observe the crowd while remaining unseen themselves. They claimed they were there to procure additional field hands for the acreage. They planned to expand. The morning proceeded with predictable cruelty. Field workers sold to planters, domestic slaves to town families, and small children wrenched from their parents. Then, just before noon, an anomaly appeared on the block. "Next lot," the auctioneer called, "property of the Granville estate, recently deceased. One male, age approximately 28, name of Marcus, educated, can read and cipher. Worked as a house servant and tutor to the Granville children. No history of rebellion, no attempts to run. Starting bid, $1,000. Marcus stood on the platform with unnerving composure, his posture straight, his gaze level, neither defiant nor submissive. His clothing was clean but worn, and his hands, the hands of someone accustomed to ledgers rather than cotton, were soft. His lighter complexion suggested mixed ancestry, but what truly captured Sarah's attention was the quiet calculation in his eyes. He scanned the buyers, not with the expected look of defeated resignation, but with an air of subtle evaluation. "Educated slaves are a risk," a man shouted from the crowd. "Gets ideas above his station. Perfect for a household that needs bookkeeping done," the auctioneer countered, undeterred. "How many of you can balance your own accounts? Here's a man who can do it for you. Do I hear 1,000? Bidding opened slowly. Most planters were wary of intelligent male slaves, viewing them as potential sources of trouble, of forged passes, or abolitionist whispers. A few town merchants bid, seeing value in a man who could manage a store. Sarah leaned close to Pritchett and gave a silent command. Pritchett raised his hand. 1,300. The bidding quickly escalated to $1,600, far above market value for a single male slave, educated or not, a fact that would certainly fuel local gossip. Marcus was delivered to Bell River 3 days later, walking the 8 miles from Hahnville with his few possessions. Pritchett led him directly to the main house study, where Sarah and Catherine waited. "You can read and write," Sarah stated, her voice making it an accusation, not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, His voice was educated, careful, revealing nothing. You tutored the Granville children. What did you teach them? Reading, writing, arithmetic, some geography, and history, whatever their father requested. Catherine circled him slowly. The Granvilles were known abolitionists, Quakers, I believe. They permitted their slaves to be educated. For the first time, a flicker, perhaps weariness, perhaps recognition, crossed Marcus's eyes. Mr. Granville believed all people possessed souls and minds worthy of development, ma'am. And you? Sarah pressed. What do you believe? I believe I am standing in front of two women who paid too much for me, he said quietly, and who clearly have something specific in mind, beyond field labor. The twins exchanged a charged glance. Their father had conditioned them to believe enslaved people were simple property, incapable of such quick analysis. We have an unusual situation, Sarah began carefully. Our father died, leaving conditions on our inheritance that require creative solutions. We need someone educated, discreet, and capable of understanding complex arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Marcus asked. The kind that must remain private within this household, Catherine replied. You will live in the main house, not the quarters. You will have access to our father's library. You will be fed properly, treated well, given freedoms that would be extraordinary elsewhere. But in exchange, you will do exactly what we say, when we say it, without question or hesitation. Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. And if I refuse these unnamed terms, then you will be sold south, Sarah said flatly. 2 cotton plantations in Mississippi, where educated slaves are often worked to death, to break them of any intellectual pretensions. I can have you on a boat within a week. It was a genuine threat, and Marcus knew it. What do you want from me? That depends, Catherine said, the corner of her mouth twitching. Can you keep secrets? Even ones that could be used as weapons? I've kept secrets my entire life, ma'am. Had to survive. Sarah walked to the window. Our father's will requires us to marry within 24 months, or lose everything. But we have no intention of submitting to marriages arranged by men who view us as property to be managed. So, we are going to subvert the terms while technically fulfilling them. I don't understand. You will, Catherine assured him. But first, we need to know if you can be trusted completely and absolutely. Over the next few days, Sarah and Catherine subjected Marcus to relentless, subtle tests. They gave him unrestricted access to the Colonel's library, noting his choices in reading material. They asked him for opinions on volatile political issues, listening for the faintest hint of abolitionist sympathy. They watched his interactions with the other enslaved people, checking for any attempt to organize or agitate. Marcus proved remarkably cautious and adaptable. He kept to himself, spoke with intelligence, and showed a deep understanding of the treacherous social terrain he occupied. He knew that educated slaves were both highly valued and highly feared. What the twins could not know was that Marcus was already in the deep center of his own, equally dangerous agenda. The Granvilles had been part of an informal abolitionist network that collected detailed testimony from enslaved people. For 5 years, Marcus had documented atrocities, names, and dates in a coded shorthand he had developed. When the Granvilles suddenly died of fever, their relatives hastily sold off the estate before anyone could find the trunk of evidence hidden in the root cellar. Marcus had managed to retrieve his most important notebooks, concealing them inside a hollowed-out Bible book no white person would bother to examine. He was brought to Bell River, expecting to continue his documentation. Instead, he found himself unexpectedly positioned in the midst of a potentially lethal conspiracy. By mid-May, his role had crystallized. Marcus became the twins' private secretary, managing household accounts and correspondence, but also serving as a confidant in a scheme they hadn't fully explained. The full plan was revealed in early June, after the house staff had retired. Our father's will requires us to marry and bear children within 24 months, Sarah began. The executors must approve our choice of husbands, men of suitable character and standing. But the will says nothing about the husbands being suitable for us, only that they meet external criteria. I'm not following, Marcus admitted. Catherine smiled, and it was a hungry, almost feral expression. We're going to marry men we can control completely. Elderly men, sickly men, or men so desperate for the connection to a wealthy plantation that they will agree to any terms we set. Men who will give us legal legitimacy without any interference in how we run Belle River. And the children? Marcus asked, the full, shocking implication beginning to surface. Biology is biology, Sarah said bluntly. Our father spent 20 years proving that lineage can be strategically managed. The executives need to see marriages and pregnancies. They don't need to see what happens behind closed doors. The full weight of their proposal hit Marcus like a physical blow. They wanted him to father their children to create the illusion of legitimate heirs while the twins maintained absolute control through paper marriages. You're asking me to commit an act that could get all of us killed, he said slowly. If anyone discovered, no one will discover, Catherine interrupted with icy certainty. We control this household completely. The marriages will be arranged carefully. We will manage every detail, every possible witness, every piece of evidence. You will be protected. Protected? Marcus laughed bitterly. I am a slave. There is no protection for me. If this fails, you will be ruined socially, perhaps sent away. I'll be hanged or burned alive, which is why you will be motivated to ensure it doesn't fail, Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. And in exchange, you will receive something worth the risk. What could possibly be worth freedom? Catherine said quietly. Documented legal freedom, and enough money to go north and start a new life. We will wait until after the children are born and the estate is securely in our names. Then we will manumit you, provide funds, and send you away with a cover story that holds up to scrutiny. Marcus looked intensely between them, searching for any sign of a lie. She was right. He wanted freedom more than he feared death, and he was smart enough to recognize this as his only real chance. But there was another, deeper reason for his agreement, something the twins hadn't considered. Marcus saw the twins' scheme as more than just a path to personal escape. It was an unprecedented opportunity to document and dismantle the entire framework of the system. If he could gather definitive proof of the Sutton family's secrets, the Colonel's experiments, and the vast network of collaborators, the planters, the doctors, the academics, he could strike a devastating blow against the institution that had stolen his life. I'll do it, he finally stated, his voice firm, on one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions, Catherine snapped. I am, Marcus countered, his gaze steady. If you want my full cooperation rather than my resentful compliance, I want to know everything. Your father's journals, his correspondence, his breeding logs. If I'm risking my life for this scheme, I deserve to understand the full context. The twins considered this. Granting him complete access was lethal, but denying it would only breed the exact resentment they couldn't afford. Agreed, Sarah conceded, but you will study them here, in this room, under our supervision. Nothing leaves this house. Unspoken by all three was the fact that they had each just made a gamble, trusting someone they fundamentally distrusted, staking their entire future on a deception so immense it required absolute, unattainable perfection. The summer brought oppressive, suffocating heat to Belle River, and within the main house. The pressure of their deadline intensified. Sarah and Catherine pursued suitable husbands with their father's cold calculus, needing men who met the executive's criteria, while being sufficiently weak or desperate for manipulation. Their first candidate was Mr. Edmund Varley, a 68-year-old widower whose plantation was failing. Varley, a former friend of the Colonel, was immediately interested in Catherine. During his July visit, his watery eyes roamed over her with a possessive gaze that made her skin crawl. "A beautiful opportunity," he declared. "A union of two fine properties. I'd be honored to guide you through the complexities of management." After he left, Catherine violently scrubbed her hands in the wash basin. "He'll do," Sarah said clinically. "He's desperate to salvage his reputation. He'll agree to any prenuptial terms to secure the connection. The marriage is a legal fiction. Marcus fathers the child, Varley takes the credit, and we maintain control." Yet, arranging to such specific marriages proved harder than anticipated. When Sarah proposed a moderately successful mobile merchant for herself, Breenidge, the co-executive, immediately rejected him. "Unsuitable background," he declared, sniffing. "Your father intended marriage into established planter families, not commercial classes. The man's grandfather was an indentured servant. For God's sake." The twins argued furiously, but Breenidge threatened court intervention if they persisted with inappropriate candidates. "He's trying to force us into marriages that benefit him," Sarah concluded, correctly sensing that Breenidge was angling to marry one of them into his own family, while the marriage negotiations stalled. Marcus immersed himself in Colonel Sutton's papers. What he found exceeded his worst fears. The breeding program had been a 20-year atrocity, systematically selling children who didn't meet the Colonel's criteria and destroying human bonds, all documented in clinical, dehumanizing language. Female number 7 shows resistance to breeding assignments. Recommend increased discipline and isolation to induce compliance. But the journals also revealed the network. The Colonel exchanged research, methodologies, and theories about racial hierarchies with academics and doctors across the South. Marcus began making careful, coded copies of the most damning entries, hiding them in his hollowed-out Bible. Secret archive intended for the North. Then he discovered a pattern. The twins had missed the rampant illness in the quarters. 3 women showed symptoms: lesions, fever, and progressive weakness. Marcus, having read the Colonel's private medical notes, recognized the diagnosis: syphilis. The Colonel had systematically infected multiple women through his sexual abuse or deliberate research. And now the disease was spreading through the quarters, past 2 partners and infants. Marcus presented his findings, laying out the annotated medical texts. "Your father gave them syphilis. The journals suggest both deliberate exposure and systematic abuse. It is now spreading, and it's killing them." Catherine's face went white. "How many?" "At least 7 showing symptoms. But it can remain dormant for years. There's no way to know how many are infected without proper medical examination." "Can it be treated?" Sarah asked, her back rigid. "Mercury treatments sometimes," Marcus explained, "but they are expensive and almost as dangerous as the disease itself, and they require a doctor willing to treat enslaved people properly." "Do it anyway," Sarah commanded, without turning around. "Purchase whatever medicines are needed from Mobile. If Grayfield refuses to treat them adequately, find someone who will. I don't care about the cost. Our father did this. We are not going to let them die from his depravity." It was the first sign of anything other than cold self-preservation Marcus had seen from the twins. He filed the detail away as valuable intelligence. Dr. Grayfield arrived, irritated, 2 days later. He confirmed the diagnosis, prescribed mercury, and suggested it might be more economical to just isolate them and replace them with healthy stock. "We will take your prescription," Catherine cut in coldly, "and we require you to examine the entire slave population. Everyone. Identify all potential cases. The expense is ours to bear. When can you begin?" The August examinations revealed the true catastrophe. 14 confirmed cases, 8 probables. Nearly a third of Belle River's enslaved population was infected. Sarah's response was immediate and final. "We are treating all of them. Purchase the mercury, the bandages, whatever's needed. Improved rations and reduced work quotas for the sick. Marcus, You will oversee the treatments and keep detailed records. Miss Sarah, Pritchett objected, horrified. This will cost thousands and reduce productivity significantly. Your father would never. Our father did this to them, Catherine interrupted, her voice steel. We are correcting his damage. The expense is irrelevant. The twins did not articulate the full, complex motivation behind their decision. It was partly pragmatic, protecting their labor force, partly guilt, recognizing their silent complicity, but mostly, it was a subtle, unacknowledged rebellion against their father's most fundamental crime. The belief that other human beings existed purely as instruments for his personal purpose. They had been raised to think the same way, but now, faced with his final atrocity, they chose a different path. Now, confronted with the human cost of that dark worldview, Sarah and Catherine were forced to choose what kind of people they would become. Marcus watched, deeply confused. He had expected to find simple monsters. Instead, he found two women twisted by their father's abuse, now struggling to untangle their own humanity from the poison he had fed them. This didn't make them allies, nor did it earn his trust, but it dangerously complicated his simple narrative of oppressor and oppressed. While Marcus wrestled with this moral complexity, the marriage negotiations reached a crisis point. In September, Breenidge arrived with a highly convenient proposal. His nephew, Thomas Breenidge, a 34-year-old who had just failed as a cotton broker in New Orleans. Thomas needed a wealthy, respectable start. Sarah needed an approved husband. Perfect match, Breenidge declared. He has impeccable breeding and will provide the steady male guidance you require. Sarah met Thomas twice and quickly realized he was weak, vain, and deeply indebted. In short, he was perfect for her scheme. I'll agree to the match, she told Breenidge, but under specific, non-negotiable conditions. A prenuptial contract, giving me sole management of Belle River. Thomas receives only an annual income, and the marriage is contingent on my sister's match also being finalized. Thomas, desperate to escape his creditors, signed the contract, agreeing to be a figurehead. Catherine's match proved far more difficult. Edmund Varley had moved on, and the executives rejected 3 other candidates. With the deadline fast approaching, Catherine introduced a terrifying new idea. What if I don't remain married? The will requires us both to marry within 24 months. It says nothing about the husbands having to survive. The room fell silent. Marcus, working at the desk, felt a spike of panic. You're suggesting murder? He said quietly. I'm suggesting that we fulfill the letter of Father's will through whatever means necessary, Catherine countered, her eyes cold. He never specified the husbands had to survive. Sarah didn't argue, which was answer enough. Marcus instantly realized his miscalculation. He had thought the twins were desperate victims. Instead, they were their father's daughters, viewing people as obstacles to be managed or removed. If you're planning to kill anyone, I want no part of it, Marcus stated. That's not what I agreed to. You agreed to do what we say, Catherine reminded him, and you will keep doing it, because the alternative is being sold south. When Marcus offered to be sold rather than participate in murder, the twins exchanged glances. Sarah intervened, her voice softer. Catherine is talking theoretically. We are not planning to kill anyone, but we must consider all possibilities. This situation is more complicated than we anticipated. Marcus didn't believe her, but he knew that as an enslaved man, his word was nothing against theirs. He nodded, agreed, and began planning how to protect himself when the inevitable violence came. In early November, the wedding preparations for Sarah and Thomas Breenidge began. The ceremony was scheduled for December 15th at Belle River. Simultaneously, Sarah and Marcus began their chilling physical relationship in the locked study. The encounters were clinical, devoid of intimacy, purely biological functions necessary to achieve a political goal. My father did this to dozens of women, Sarah admitted one night, lying apart from him. forced them into exactly this situation. I swore I'd never be like him, yet here I am. You're not forcing me, Marcus said, knowing the threat of being sold south made that statement a lie. I own you, she said, her voice filled with sudden, brutal honesty. There is no consent possible in that dynamic. It was the most truthful thing she had ever said, and it terrified Marcus because it proved she understood the full, moral horror of her actions and proceeded anyway. By mid-November, Sarah was pregnant. Dr. Grayfield confirmed it, and the executives were delighted. Thomas Breenidge, oblivious to the truth, accepted the news with self-satisfied pleasure. Catherine's situation, however, remained unresolved until early December, when she announced her choice. Mr. Lawrence Kemper, a 51-year-old widower from Wilcox County. He was thin, nervous, and possessed a persistent cough, suggesting consumption. He deferred to Catherine constantly and seemed pathetically grateful. He's perfect, Catherine told Marcus after Kemper left. Dying slowly, desperate for companionship, and too weak to assert any authority. The executives will approve him because he meets their surface criteria, and he'll be dead within a year, leaving me a widow free to do as I please. You're going to let him die of consumption? I'm going to let nature take its course, Catherine corrected. Her logic a cold evasion of morality that Marcus found impossible to counter. Sarah's wedding took place on a cold, clear December day. Thomas Breenidge, looking pleased with his prize, was completely unaware that he had been entirely bought out of his own marriage. Sarah wore an ivory silk dress, her expression perfectly composed. Marcus watched from the back of the room. Later that night, Sarah came to the study. It's done, she said. The first condition is satisfied. Thomas will be a comfortable figurehead and will stay out of my way. I purchased his cooperation with threats. Marcus, the same way I purchased yours. I'm my father's daughter, remember? The new bitterness in her voice was dangerous. She was beginning to hate herself, which meant she might act unpredictably either, something altruistic to prove her difference, or something terrible to prove her indifference. Catherine's wedding was scheduled for January 20th, 1848. After the executives easily approved the ailing Lawrence Kemper. But in the weeks between the two weddings, the intense strain of their deception began to fracture the twins' united front. House staff reported increasingly loud arguments. Pritchett noticed distracted, countermanded decisions. Marcus knew the truth. Sarah's growing self-loathing and Catherine's increasingly cold calculation were tearing the sisters apart. The breaking point arrived the night before Catherine's wedding. Marcus, working on his secret documentation in the study, heard screams upstairs. He rushed up to find Sarah's face scratched and Catherine's nose bleeding. She wants to kill him, Sarah shrieked. Not just let him die, actually poison him. He's dying anyway. Catherine screamed back. Why wait? Why risk him changing the marriage terms? We dose him with arsenic. He's dead in 6 months. I'm a widow, and we're done. Because that makes us murderers. Actual, deliberate murderers. Sarah countered. Catherine's next words froze. The room. We're already murderers. Or had you forgotten the coffee you served father, the night he died? The room went utterly silent. Marcus stared at the twins as sickening clarity flooded his mind. You killed your father, he stated. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. Arsenic mixed with powdered glass in his coffee. Small amounts over 3 weeks made it look like heart failure. Grayfield never suspected. We had to, Catherine insisted, her voice raw. He was going to sell Marcus and 3 other slaves to a brutal trader from Mississippi and force us into marriages with men who would have continued his eugenics program. We had no choice. There is always a choice, Marcus said quietly. Easy for you to say, Catherine snapped. You're not trapped in a cage built by a man who viewed you as a biological experiment. Before the argument could escalate, they heard Thomas Breenidge stumbling drunkenly on the stairs. The 3 conspirators silenced instantly. listening to him curse as he fumbled with his wife's door before shuffling away. When he was gone, Sarah spoke, her voice strained. "We cannot do this, Catherine. If you poison Lawrence, it's over. Someone will notice, someone will investigate. And all of this, the plantation, our freedom, Marcus documentation will be destroyed. Then what do you suggest? We are running out of time. We wait. We endure," Sarah whispered. "And when we've secured the inheritance, then we decide who we want to be. I don't know if there's anything left of me to save," Catherine replied, her voice tired. Marcus realized he had been documenting the wrong story. The true horror of Belle River wasn't merely the atrocities against the enslaved, but the way their father had twisted his own daughters into weapons, now aimed at each other. They were simultaneous victims and perpetrators, trapped in roles they were performing with increasing desperation. Catherine's wedding to Lawrence Kemper took place on January 20th, 1848. It was a smaller, starker affair. Kemper looked skeletal, his persistent cough worsening in the cold. He had to be supported as he walked. When he attempted to kiss his bride, he was seized by a coughing fit that left blood on his handkerchief. "Consumption's got him good," Grayfield muttered. "Give him 6 months, maybe less." Kemper was settled into a distant bedroom, pathetically grateful for every small kindness from the servants. In early February, Catherine and Marcus began their encounters. Unlike Sarah, Catherine treated it purely as a transaction, an efficient chore she completed and left without a word. By March, she was pregnant. Lawrence Kemper, now confined to his bed, accepted the news with confused pleasure. "Thank God. You'll have something to remember me by," he wheezed. The executives visited in April and found all conditions met, both twins married, both visibly pregnant, and cotton production maintained. Breenidge declared himself satisfied. Meanwhile, Marcus spent his nights copying his most crucial documentation, the breeding program, the syphilis epidemic, the poisoning, and the marriage scheme, but still needed a way to get the evidence north. The solution arrived in May with a traveling preacher, Jacob Sturgis. During dinner, Sturgis pointedly mentioned spending time in Philadelphia. Marcus recognized the emphasis, a coded reference to the abolitionist movement. Later, near the stable, Marcus made the small, recognized hand gesture of the Underground Railroad. Sturgis agreed to carry the documents. Marcus spent 10 frantic days copying everything onto thin, microscopic paper. He enlisted an enslaved field worker, Isaiah, to deliver the documents to Sturgis and Selma. 2 weeks later, Isaiah confirmed delivery. The evidence now existed beyond the twins' control. The strain was mounting. Thomas Breenidge began drinking heavily. Sarah grew withdrawn. Then, on August 17, 1848, Lawrence Kemper died peacefully in his sleep. Catherine was now a pregnant widow, though she hadn't killed him. Kemper's death brought a new, complicated guilt that shadowed her composure. In late October, everything nearly unraveled. Thomas Breenidge, drunk, casually mentioned that Sarah had been pregnant within weeks of their marriage, surprisingly quick timing. The gossip spread like wildfire. Breenidge arrived at Belle River, demanding answers. Sarah, 7 months pregnant, made a final, calculated move. She stood before the assembled neighbors and delivered a concise confession. "I was violated," she said steadily. "Before our marriage, Thomas and I were intimate. I became pregnant. Rather than cancel the marriage and face ruin, we proceeded with the ceremony. It was wrong, but it doesn't invalidate the will." Her frank, calculated admission made the story believably scandalous lie that perfectly protected the lethal deception underneath. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Breenidge, having no evidence to the contrary, declared the matter closed. Sarah collapsed after they left, her composure finally shattered. She went into labor on November 14, 1848. At dawn the next morning, a baby's cry pierced the house. "A girl," the midwife announced, "small but healthy." Sarah looked at the infant, who had features that were usefully ambiguous in a house built on lies. "She's free," Sarah whispered. "Her name is Abigail." After the grandmother they never knew, Catherine delivered on December 7th. Her baby was darker, requiring more careful explanation. "Another girl," the midwife said. "She's a fighter." Catherine looked at her daughter. "I'm calling her Ruth," she said. The names, Ruth and Abigail, and are the women their father had systematically erased. They were the first decisions the twins had made that weren't calculated for advantage. The final act of their deception arrived on December 20th. Breenidge and the executives returned to examine the babies and formalize the estate transfer. Breenidge clinically verified the births, noted the existence of Abigail and Ruth, and pronounced the will's conditions fully satisfied. Belle River Plantation is hereby transferred to Sarah Breenidge and Catherine Kemper. The estate is officially closed. After he left, Sarah felt no triumph, only vast, crippling exhaustion. They had won, but the cost was incalculable. As Marcus brought Abigail to her, Sarah made a decision. "We are keeping our promise. Your manumission papers will be filed next week. Funds sufficient to reach Philadelphia and establish yourself." Marcus, expecting delays, was caught off guard. "Just like that. We made an agreement. I am honoring it, and the documents I sent north," Marcus pressed. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "I know about them. Pritchett intercepts all correspondence. I know what was in those papers, everything. I didn't stop you because you were right to document it. Someone needs to tell the truth." Catherine appeared, holding Ruth. "We're not stopping you, but we're asking for 6 months. Stay until June, help stabilize operations, then leave with our blessing and enough money to start fresh." It was a masterpiece of manipulation, but it was also the truth. 6 months, he agreed. The winter passed in relative peace. Marcus, preparing for departure, found himself growing attached to the children he had fathered and developing a complicated respect for the twins. Victims attempting to climb out of their victimhood. In March, a letter arrived from Jacob Sturgis in Pennsylvania. The testimony had reached the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society and was being compiled for a major report on Alabama plantations. "Father's legacy will be exposure and condemnation," Sarah stated quietly. They moved Marcus' departure up to mid. The night before he left, Sarah handed him a satchel, heavy with gold coins and letters of introduction. "This is more than we agreed," she said. "Abigail and Ruth will ask about their father someday. I want to tell them he was a good man who made difficult choices, who documented the truth when others wanted it buried." Catherine joined them, and they said goodbye as a fractured, desperate family. Marcus held his daughters one last time. "Be good," he whispered. "Be better than all of us." Marcus left Belle River. On April 18, 1849, he carried his papers and a precious daguerreotype of himself, holding both girls. He secured passage in Mobile, and his ship departed April 23rd. His testimony reached the public sooner than the twins expected. The Anti-Slavery Society published their report in July 1829, detailing the plantation's conditions and naming Colonel Nathaniel Sutton explicitly. It caused immediate outrage. In August, Harold Breenidge began asking aggressive questions about the leaks. On September 3rd, he arrived at Belle River with a sheriff and a warrant. "Marcus was manumitted," Sarah replied calmly. "Whatever he did after is his business." When Breenidge accused Marcus of stealing the colonel's journals, Sarah countered that they had merely given their secretary access as part of his duties. The search was fruitless. Catherine had systematically burned everything weeks earlier. "This isn't over," Breenidge threatened before leaving. "We need to disappear," Catherine concluded. In 6 weeks, they liquidated their entire world. They sold Belle River for quick cash, manumitted several key house staff, and sold the remaining enslaved population to a Quaker merchant who promised safe transport to free states. Thomas Breenidge was paid off and signed an agreement never to contest the sale. On October 14, 1849, Sarah and Catherine, traveling as young widows with their infant daughters, boarded a ship in Mobile, bound for New Orleans. But before leaving Alabama, they made one final, calculated stop. On October 15, 1849, a fire erupted in the basement of the Hanville Courthouse. The building burned for 6 hours, collapsing before dawn. 3 bodies were found, summarily identified as vagrants seeking shelter, though no one bothered to ask why they had been chained to the stone walls. The investigation concluded an overturned lamp caused the accidental fire. Most county records from 1847 to 1849 were perfectly destroyed. Anyone trying to trace the dark history of Bell River Plantation would find only fragments and gaping. Silent holes Sarah and Catherine reached Wisconsin in December 1849. They purchased a small farm outside Madison under false identities, presenting themselves as widowed sisters starting anew. Their daughters grew up knowing only that their mothers had escaped difficult circumstances in Alabama, and that their father had been a good man who made sacrifices. Marcus established himself as a bookkeeper in Philadelphia. He never married again, never spoke publicly about Alabama, but he continued providing testimony and assisting the Underground Railroad until the Civil War. He kept the daguerreotype hidden, taking it out occasionally to look at his daughters' faces. In 1863, a Union lieutenant discovered a sealed trunk in Bell River's abandoned ruins containing additional journals and breeding logs that confirmed every detail of Marcus's report and added new horrors. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton's chilling legacy became exactly what his daughters predicted: exposure, condemnation, and irrefutable evidence of systematic evil. But the full truth about Sarah and Catherine, about Marcus, and the circumstances of the fire remained hidden in the burned records and carefully constructed lives. The courthouse fire was never truly solved. The 3 bodies were never identified, and the story of the Alabama twin sisters who shared one male slave between them to secure their freedom remained buried in ash and silence for over a century. It doesn't matter whether every detail is verifiable. What matters is what the story reveals about the system that made such events not only possible, but almost inevitable. A system built on using human beings as property and violence as a tool of control. The Sutton twins, if they existed, were both victims and perpetrators. Marcus, if he lived, was both collaborator and resistance fighter. The children inherited a legacy of trauma and survival, guilt and resilience.